In this lesson, we begin our study of William Shakespeare's Hamlet. I know you have all heard of Hamlet. It is probably the most famous play in the world. We are going to see parts of this play acted and talk about it together in just 4 lessons. This would not be nearly enough time for a work so complicated as Hamlet if we were trying to discover all at once everything that makes it the great play it is. But that is not our purpose. Great plays, someone once said, are like people. If we want to know them well, we have to go back and see them very often. The first visit is just to get acquainted, and that is what we are going to do with Hamlet. Pay it a first visit. When we have finished talking about the play and seeing parts of it acted, there will probably still be many unanswered questions in your mind. But don't be concerned by that. If we have been able to get a glimpse of what Hamlet has to say to you and me today, if we've seen even a little why this play is just as alive now as on the day it was written, that will be enough. If we succeed in that, you'll find time for other visits later. Today, in this first lesson, I think we ought to begin by taking a quick look at the times when Hamlet was first being seen and talked about, the times of Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I came to the throne of England in 1558 and ruled until she died in her 70th year in 1603. She was vain, pleasure-loving, changeable as the weather, with a passion for money and expensive clothes. But she was a good queen in spite of all this, very shrewd, very determined, absolutely devoted to the welfare of her country. She took no husband because, she said, she was married to her people. Her people feared her, but they also adored her, and under her leadership were inspired to deeds of glory that laid the foundation of England's world influence for centuries to come. In her name, Sir Francis Drake sailed his ship, the Golden Hind, around the world. In her name, the English Navy, with its light, maneuverable ships, whipped the great war vessels of the invincible Armada of Spain. In her name, too, Sir Walter Raleigh launched the first English colony in North America. They called that territory Virginia, in honor of Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. We can feel for ourselves something of the adoration Elizabeth inspired in her Englishmen if we look for a moment at a play that Shakespeare wrote about 10 years after her death. The actual subject of this play is Elizabeth's father, King Henry VIII. But in the last scene, Elizabeth herself is brought on the stage as a newborn infant ready to be christened. Her father, the king, holds her in his arms. And as her Christian name, Elizabeth, is conferred, the Archbishop of Canterbury is moved to speak a prophecy of the glories of her future reign. Since the play was written 10 years after Elizabeth had died, this prophecy is, of course, in reality a history of those glories. And it lets us see very clearly the deep affection that Elizabeth's people had for her as they looked back on her life and rule. Here is the scene.
What is her name? Elizabeth. With this kiss, take my blessing. God protect thee, into whose hand I now give thy life. Amen. Amen. Ye have been too prodigal. I thank ye heartily. And so shall this lady when she has so much English. Let me speak, sir, for heaven now bids me. And the words I utter, let none think flattery, for they'll find them truth. This royal infant, though in her cradle, yet now promises upon this land 1,000,000 blessings, which time shall bring to ripeness. She shall be a pattern to all princes living with her, and all that shall succeed. Truth shall nurse her. She shall be loved and feared. Her own shall bless her. Her foes shake like a field of beaten corn and hang their heads in sorrow. Good grows with her. In her days, every man shall eat in safety under his own vine what he plants, and sing the merry songs of peace to all his neighbors.
Thou speakst wonders.
She shall be, to the happiness of England, an aged princess. Many days shall see her, and no day without a deed to crown it. Would I had known no more. But she must die. She must. The saints must have her. Yet a virgin, a most unspotted lily shall she pass to the ground, and all the world shall mourn her.
As we have just seen with our own eyes, Englishmen in the times of Queen Elizabeth knew they were lucky in their queen. But she was lucky in them, too. Her reign brought forth in England a remarkable succession of great men. Their daring, their appetite for life, their stubborn individualism still look at us out of their quiet eyes in the many portraits that have come down to us. Some of them braved the seas, like the adventurers we were speaking of before, Drake and Raleigh. Some of them opened up new frontiers in the world of science, like Sir Francis Bacon, who discovered the importance of experimentation. Some of them were explorers of the human heart and mind. These were the poets, the playwrights, the men of literature, and the greatest of them all was William Shakespeare. We don't know very much about the life of Shakespeare. That is, not very much that matters. We know that he was born in the little village of Stratford on the Avon River. We know that he may have lived as a boy in this house. We know that he may have had his schooling here in the Stratford Grammar School. We know that at the age of 18, he married a girl somewhat older than himself from a neighboring village, and that they had 3 children. And we know that he died in Stratford and is buried in the parish church. We know a little more than this about Shakespeare's writing career, but again, not very much. We know that by the time he was 28, he had gone to London, which you see here in a print made in 1616. We know that in London he became an actor and also a promising young playwright in the busy new profession of the English theater that had just recently sprung up in his day, as television has in ours. We know that for 20 years, give or take a little, he followed this profession, turning out a total of 37 plays, comedies, historical plays, and tragedies, many of which were first performed at the Globe Theater. After his death, his plays were published together in a collection that we call today the First Folio. I have a copy of it here. And we know that during one miraculous period, from about 1600 to 1608, he wrote 5 plays that many people believe to be the greatest tragedies ever written: Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra. Hamlet was the first. It was probably written and performed in the year 1600. Today, it is still performed all over the world and in dozens of different languages. It is more passionately discussed and argued about than any other play in existence. This is what I meant when I said at the beginning of this lesson that Hamlet is just as much alive now as the day it was written. Still, Shakespeare wrote Hamlet for a rather different kind of theater from our theater, and for audiences that were rather different too. We'll understand better why the play is what it is if we find out a little more about Elizabethan audiences and the theater they attended. Naturally, Shakespeare's audiences were in most ways like our own. They were people. They liked sword play and suspense and plenty of fast action. They liked adventure stories and murder stories and ghost stories and stories like our westerns where a hero with more lives than a cat clobbers a whole stage full of villains and gets the girl. But they could take stronger meat than most modern audiences can. They were not upset if a man's eyes were gouged out on the stage, a neat trick that the actor probably managed with pig's eyes and a sheep's bladder full of blood, or if a character bit off his tongue and spat it into the audience, another neat trick probably managed with a lump of bleeding liver. There is one Elizabethan play. It happens again to be by Shakespeare, in which the hero's hand is chopped off. Let's look at a part of this scene for ourselves. The hero, Titus Andronicus, has been told by the villain, Aaron the Moor, that two of his sons who have been condemned to death by a cruel emperor will be spared, provided someone in his family will cut off his hand and send it to the emperor as ransom. They all volunteer.
Nay, come, agree whose hand shall go along, for fear they die before their pardon come.
My hand shall go.
By heaven, it shall not go.
Sirs, strive no more. Such withered herbs as these are meet for plucking up. Therefore mine.
Sweet father, if I shall be thought thy son, let me redeem my brothers both from death.
And for our father's sake and mother's care, now let me show a brother's love to thee.
Agree between you. I will spare my hand.
Then I'll go fetch an axe.
But I will use the axe.
Come hither, Aaron. I will deceive them both. Lend me thy hand, and I will give thee mine.
Elizabethan audiences, I am sure you will agree, had strong stomachs. The fact is, they were cruder in some ways than our audiences. Yet in other ways, they were more sensitive and more sophisticated. They loved words. They loved figures of speech, puns, vivid metaphors. Especially, they loved poetry, language with a powerful rhythm to it, the language of strong feeling. And since the theater is the home of strong feeling, they expected to hear poetry in the theater, and they did. They heard some of the most moving and complicated poetry ever written, and they came back for more. I want you to listen to a sample of it from Hamlet. In the lines we are about to hear, the young hero is thinking out loud about death. On the one hand, he longs for it, thinking of it as a sleep, and therefore a release from troubles. But on the other hand, he fears it, knowing that it may not be a sleep, but rather another life with terrors all its own. He comes to the conclusion it is this fear that death may not be a sleep after all that makes men go on living, even under the most painful conditions.
be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die. To sleep no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die. To sleep. To sleep. Perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of? Thus conscience does make cowards of us all. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action.
You may not have understood every word in those lines, but I think you will agree that they are complicated, and that the thoughts expressed in them are profound. At any rate, we can see from these illustrations, the chopped-off hand, and the meditation on death, that the Elizabethan theater audience had extremely varied tastes. The most important reason for this was that the audience itself was extremely varied. It contained all classes of people and all capacities of mind. Our audience today, for theater, movie, radio, even television, tends to split into several audiences, each choosing its own kind of amusement, and within that kind, the programs that suit it. Londoners in the time of Queen Elizabeth had no such choice. They could go to the Bear Garden and watch savage dogs hurl themselves at a chained bear, or they could go to the playhouse and watch a play. For spectator entertainment, that was about all they had. This meant that the authors of plays were obliged to supply something for everybody. They had to please at one and the same time those who wanted violence, those who wanted singing and dancing and clowning, those who wanted mad scenes and murder and whatever else would make their flesh crawl, those who wanted wisecracks and witty sayings that they could quote later on as their own, and those who wanted these things but something more, something they could take away with them in the form of increased understanding of themselves. Hamlet, we know, pleased all of them. It had something for every taste. On the one hand, murder, adultery, madness, suicide, a ghost, rowdy, off-color jokes, thrilling sword play, 5 violent deaths, and at the end, 4 corpses heaped up upon the stage. On the other hand, passages of complex feeling like the one you heard a moment ago, subtle studies of character, a hero who is soldier, courtier, and scholar all rolled into one, and some of the gravest and deepest comment in the English language on the pains and problems of human life. So Shakespeare wrote Hamlet the way he did, partly because of what his audiences demanded of him. But there was another influence on him, too. This was the influence of the kind of theater he wrote his plays to be performed in, the Elizabethan public playhouse. Shakespeare's own playhouse, the Globe, was a many-sided or possibly a round structure, 3 stories high, enclosing a central arena that was open to the sky. From this source came the lighting, for there were no footlights, and for this reason, plays were always performed in the Elizabethan playhouse in the afternoon. Let's go inside. As we enter the playhouse, we are looking at a stage that is not separated from us by an arch and curtain, as in our theaters. Instead, the Elizabethan stage juts far out into the central arena, and it has the audience sitting or standing on 3 sides of it. You can see at a glance how different Shakespeare's theater is in this respect from the one we are used to. The modern theater, with its arch and curtain, aims at creating the illusion that the audience is not really present, that the audience is an invisible group of persons looking in on an action of real life. And this illusion is strengthened by the fact that the audience sits in darkness, while the stage is ablaze with light. Shakespeare's theater is just the reverse of this. It stresses the presence of the audience and the audience's participation in the play. There they are, big as life, standing or sitting on 3 sides of the actors, always fully visible to each other in the broad daylight flooding down through the open roof. The playwright who writes for a theater of this kind can't possibly pretend that the audience isn't there. Instead, he takes it into his confidence. He lets the people in the play make confessions directly to the audience, which nobody on the stage is supposed to hear. These are called asides. Moreover, he lets the hero talk directly to the audience about his inner thoughts, even though most men, when alone, do not speak their minds out loud. These are called soliloquies. You were listening to one of them, Hamlet's soliloquy about death, a few minutes ago. There was one other important feature of Shakespeare's stage, besides the fact that it was surrounded on 3 sides by the audience. Shakespeare's stage was bare. Objects might be brought in and placed on it during the play, a table, an altar, a throne, or whatever the action required. But it was bare of scenery. Furthermore, lighting effects were impossible, and theater programs did not exist to inform the audience who or where the actors were. These conditions, like the visible audience on 3 sides, naturally affected the play. They compelled the playwright to supply all the information the audience needed in the words of the play itself. After this, it was up to the audience's imagination to do the rest. We are now going to watch our actors do the first few lines of Hamlet and see how much a skillful playwright can stimulate our imagination by words alone.
Who's there?
Nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself.
Long live the king!
Bernardo,
He. Come most carefully upon your hour.
'Tis now struck 12. Get thee to bed, Francisco.
This relief, much thanks. It is bitter cold, and I am sick at heart.
Have you had quiet guard?
Not a mouse stirring.
Well, good night. If you do meet Horatio and Marcellus, the rivals of my watch, bid them make haste.
All this has taken only 13 lines and fewer than 75 words. We have learned the time, it is night. The place, a castle platform. The character of the weather, bitter cold. The identity of the speakers, 2 soldiers of the guard. And we have learned that something is wrong. In fact, you may have noticed that something is very wrong. At a changing of the guard, it is the guard on duty who should challenge the guard approaching. But just the opposite happens here. The guard approaching is so uneasy and apprehensive that he challenges the guard on duty. So our play starts outside a castle on a chilly evening just past midnight, with a powerful hint that something frightening is about to happen. Within a few lines, it does happen.
Who's there?
Friends to this ground.
And liegemen to the Dane.
Welcome, Horatio. Welcome, good Marcellus.
What, has this thing appeared again tonight?
I have seen nothing.
Horatio says 'tis but our fantasy, and will not let belief take hold of him touching this dreaded sight twice seen of us. Therefore I have entreated him along with us to watch the minutes of this night, that if again this apparition come, he may approve our eyes and speak to it.
Tush. 'Twill not appear.
Sit down a while, and let us once again assail your ears that are so fortified against our story, what we have tonight seen.
Well, sit we down, and let us hear Bernardo speak of this.
Last night of all, when yon same star that's westward from the pole had made his course to illume that part of heaven where now it burns, Marcellus and myself, the bell then beating one.
Peace! Prick thee off! Look where it comes again!
The same figure like the king that's dead.
Thou art a scholar. Speak to it, Horatio.
Looks it not like the king? Mark it, Horatio.
Most like. It heralds me with fear and wonder.
It would be spoke to.
Question it, Horatio.
What art thou that usurps this time of night, together with that fair and warlike form in which the majesty of buried Denmark did sometimes march? By heaven, I charge thee, speak!
It is offended.
See? It stalks away.
Stay. Speak! Speak, I charge thee, speak!
After this scene, we are ready for the play. Shakespeare has not only stimulated our imaginations, he has aroused our curiosity. He has let us see some anxious guardsmen on a castle platform, and then a mysterious figure, apparently a ghost, who appears to them but will not speak. Shakespeare knows that we will be puzzled by this. He knows that we will want to learn more. Why has the ghost appeared? What is wrong? The answers to these questions will be the subject of the play and the subject of our second lesson.